wheel, his knuckles run white with desire. The wheels of his Mustang exploding on the highway like a slug from a 45. True death, 400 horsepower of maximum performance, piercing the night. This is Black Sunshine.
Far Cry 5 then. Well, a lot of what's been talked about with this is to do with the drama and so on surrounding the reviews and the game itself. If that's what you're here to listen to and to hear my analysis and take on, that's at the end, because I want to lead by example when it comes to game reviews, and if you're here for a review, you want to know whether the game's any good and what its strong points and weak points are, so let's get that out of the way first. Stylistically, the game is very polished. The countryside and so on is fairly believable, though the towns and so on aren't perhaps big enough or as big as they should be, but they're as big as they need to be. Most of the area is either fields or wilderness that you can go through, and this is fairly convincing, though the incidences of running into wildlife are a lot more common than you might otherwise think. So graphically it's very polished. I mean, we're probably on fairly late for this generation of consoles, so people kind of know what they're doing and can eke out pretty much the most that they can from the hardware. So yeah, that's all there. It's very, very American. Now, a lot of games are very American, but this is like balls out, Team America World Police kind of American swagger. That's present throughout the whole game and in the themes of it, and in the clash between the opponents and the people you're on the side of. I mean, the two sides, there isn't that much that really separates them per se, other than perhaps the zeal with which they follow their particular religion. It's hard to draw any real distinctions between the sides, other than that one side are complete assholes and are trying to kill you. It's so steeped in kind of cheesy Americana, but this kind of makes sense. I mean, since Far Cry 3, so including this installment for the last few, Far Cry has had a particular set of themes and values that are present throughout the games. Stylistically, there's a mystical element, there's a kind of fish out of water element to an extent. There's exoticism and mysticism in it. And when you take those themes and you take them into America, it can perhaps seem shocking to some people to see America being treated the same way that other cultures have been treated in the Far Cry games, and which the software company has received a fair amount of criticism for in the past, as sort of cultural appropriation and lack of respect and so on. In going after American culture in this way, they've just done exactly the same thing. That should ameliorate the concerns that people have over the way that they culturally appropriate other cultures, because they've applied exactly the same thing to American culture. What this reminds me of in a lot of ways is how Western culture, and particularly Christianity, is often portrayed in Japanese media, particularly anime. They seem to find a lot of the things in religion, Christian religion, ridiculous in the same way that I do, and they kind of overemphasize them and use them to produce horror elements and so on. Things like the sacrament and so on, they seem to find bizarre, and they draw on Western Christian culture in the same way that we draw on other cultures for our monsters, for our horror, for a touch of spice and exoticism and difference when we portray those cultures, when we use them in our games and our media and so on. So it's interesting to see American culture treated in exactly the same way, without favour or bias. For one side of the argument, I think this would bring home how they've approached these other cultures, how absurdist it is. But for some people, it seems to be shocking. But stylistically, it all makes perfect sense to me. You've got militia culture, you've got preppers, You have all these kind of independent characters, veterans, and so on. It's a parade of stereotypes, perhaps even more so than the other games have been, in that they perhaps didn't feel the need to hold back quite so much with Western characters. So it's an Americana theme park with shooting, in the same way that other ones have been a Nepalese theme park with shooting, or a tropical island theme park with shooting. So it all works, and stylistically it's consistent, it's not different. This is a game that is stylistically the same as the previous couple of installments of Far Cry, drawing on the same elements. It's mostly familiar. Gunplay and so on works fine. It's not quite as visceral as I perhaps would have liked. I didn't notice that so much in the previous games. I noticed it more in this one. I think perhaps the familiarity of the setting made that stand out more. I felt that it should have been bloodier rather than slightly more cartoonish. The only games that have really ever really gone balls out on the bloodiness are the Soldier of Fortune ones, and I'd kind of like to see an update of those. Those were really quite brutal, but in today's atmosphere, who knows whether we'll ever get to see something like that or not. But overall, it's shiny, it's polished, it's not really anything new though. When it comes to AAA games, stylistically, I'm somewhere between a 3 and a 4, but I'm gonna be generous and give it a 4 when it comes to style, because it is so polished and familiar. It works. The world is believable enough when it needs to be, and it's cartoonish enough when it needs to be, that it all works. It doesn't have a distinctive style that could really cement that 4. In terms of substance, it's a little bit thinner. The world feels bigger, but there's less tasks and things to do in the background. I'm not sure whether I like that or not. For example, they got rid of climbing up the radio towers to reveal terrain, which I'm happy enough about. But also they got rid of the hunting for skins to make bigger pouches and so on for your ammunition and your weapons and so on. That, in some ways, it was tedious having to hunt down rare animals and so on, but it also gave you things to do on the side and drew you away from the main plotline and made you explore in the previous games, which it doesn't so much in this. Instead, you boost your abilities, your skills. This role-playing element comes in by performing more generic tasks, like getting a certain number of kills with a certain weapon, or getting a certain number of stealth kills, or fishing, because there has to be a fishing sub-game, doesn't there? Fishing different fish out and so on. And these give you skill points that you can then invest in boosting up your character in various ways, some of which you may have otherwise gotten by hunting and skinning in previous games. Some ways that's better, some ways that's worse. I think it's really down to you on which side that falls. I mean, do you prefer performing these certain acts to get points that gives you more choice, or do you prefer hunting for something specific to give you a particular boost and the sense of accomplishment that comes from doing that? Replayability is a bit of an issue because it doesn't have I can't remember what they call it, a playthrough plus mode where you take your end character from the previous game and replay with that character, which is a shame because this game has a very definitive ending, more on which in a minute. And if you do continue playing, it kind of feels hollow after the end of the story, and it becomes absurdly difficult to raise the rest of your stats, get the rest of your skills, max out, and get that full completion, because enemies by that point are so thin on the ground that you don't have the opportunity to necessarily do all those tasks that you need. So that really hurts the substantive and the long-term appeal of the game. Multiplayer is meh. I'm not a fan of multiplayer, so don't take my word too much for it, but I tried a few rounds and I didn't like it. By comparison, I have been playing Fortnite recently, and despite not really being a multiplayer game kind of guy and not liking online play and so on, but I've enjoyed Fortnite, whereas the multiplayer in this sort of standard team deathmatch stuff, it didn't feel polished at all, it didn't feel good at all. I am interested in this zombie add-on they're doing for DLC. I can see using the same world and having a zombie game set within it as being fun in the same way that it was with Red Dead Redemption, for example. But there's still a lot of play in there. The story is engaging enough. It just let me down at the end. I'll get to that in a sec. So substance-wise, I guess from an FPS, I would normally expect to get maybe 8 hours of gameplay for my money, but for an open world game like this, I expect a lot more. And for me, it just kind of eked the amount of gameplay I was expecting from this game, and then kind of disappointed me in terms of plot just at the end, otherwise fine, and in terms of that lack of replayability, that lack of completionism, or at least making it so difficult that I can't be asked to do it. So overall I'm going to give it, substance-wise, a 3 out of 5. There is plenty to do, but less. The skill point system, it depends how you are. You know, I enjoy role-playing elements more, and I don't know, I didn't quite enjoy this as much as previous installments, but it is perfectly good. There's plenty to do. The story's engaging and interesting. Substantially, there's enough there, but not as much as I wanted. I didn't feel satisfied, so 3. So overall, I give it a 4 out of 5 for style, barely, and a 3 out of 5 for substance, which gives it an overall value of 3.5 out of 5, so slightly above average game, which is kind of what you expect and should be the status quo for a big AAA sort of tentpole release. So it's good, but not that good, and it just kind of disappointed me a bit in a few ways. I did enjoy that it was set in America and that it was different, and yet treated America and American culture and American religion and so on in exactly the same way that it had treated cultures and religions in previous Far Cry elements. I did also like that it brought in a kind of questionable pseudo-spiritual element that's also present in Far Cry 3 and Far Cry 4. Yeah, that's here in this, and it's an important key element to the whole game. And again, they treated it the same way, so this is all good. I mean, everything that they did seemed good to me. The game is a good game. It's fun to play. There's enough to do, but not as much as I would have liked. It's a fun, good experience. But like all Far Cry games, a lot of it is emergent. It's the things that you remember, the things that happen, is down to how random elements interact. You know, whether a guard is in a certain position, whether a creature spawns at this particular point, whether you're stalking someone and they suddenly get attacked by a frankly OP turkey. Yeah, these kind of things are random. They're not necessarily things that are going to happen for everybody. You know, you're going to end up with your own personal stories, like that time I got chain kill on a rooftop of 3 guys who were looking for me in the wrong place, or whatever. Or in a previous Far Cry, I was stalking I think a deer, and then an eagle swooped down and took it away. You know, these little funny happenstances, they emerge from the game world, from random elements that are outside your control. So everyone's experience is going to be different, and everyone's going to have different things there. But those are the standout things that you remember, more so than the crafted plots or the crafted encounters. And that's a little odd, but I like it. When it works, it's really good. When it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. But that may mean that your experience of the game isn't going to be as good as mine, or mine isn't going to be as good as yours. But it's still interesting. One of the things that intrigues me with a game designer's perspective, looking at Far Cry and wondering how you could bring that kind of thing over more reliably into tabletop games, where situations like that, things that people remember, emerge from gameplay. without it being quite so random. But overall, yeah, a good game, worth buying, worth playing. I wouldn't pay too much attention to all the media fuss around it, which we're about to get into with spoilers. There's spoilers here, and I'm going to discuss the controversy around the game. So, spoilers, spoilers, spoilers. The game was almost ruined for me by the ending. You spend this entire time freeing the people, doing favours for people, getting the bar and so on up and running again, helping everybody out, making the world a better place, putting the cult down, putting an end to what they're doing, you know, brainwashing people, drugging people, slaughtering and perverting animals, just taking over the whole area and screwing with everyone. So you spend the whole time tearing down everything that they're doing. You back them into a corner, and you know, you're about to take down the leader and put paid to this evil cult, and then a nuke goes off. The cult was right. The collapse is happening, and everything that you've done has perhaps doomed humanity. This may be their last shot at survival, and you end up shut in a bunker with the leader of the cult, who you had previously been taking into custody. It just... all games are pointless. Yeah, it's just a diversion. But yeah, entertainment has value in and of itself, but still, within the context of the game, it just rips the ground out from under you. But I think there wasn't really anywhere else they could go. You know, once I got over my initial disgust and disappointment at this ending, if you're going to treat a cult or a spiritual belief as if it was true, at least to an extent, as they have in the previous couple of installments of Far Cry, then there's really nowhere else you can go other than apocalyptic when it comes to these kind of survivalist end times Christian cults. There's just nowhere else you can go with it. So I think they were kind of written into a corner, because that was kind of the only payoff you could really have narratively. It's just disappointing. And they don't let you play in the aftermath either. I would like to emerge almost into a Fallout like world and scavenge for supplies and so on, and fight the remnants of the cult for control of the future. I'd love for that to have been some DLC. But it doesn't look like that's gonna happen, which is unfortunate, probably because of the inevitable comparisons with Fallout. But that was a kick to the guts, and it almost fucked the entire game experience for me in a similar way to the way that the end of The Last of Us kind of ripped narrative control out of my hands and made me really pissed off. Now, in terms of the controversy this time appears to be that a lot of people who read politics into games where there really isn't any political stance or message, they seem to have wanted this game to be political in a way that it wasn't. I mean, like I mentioned during the review section of this video, it's really hard to draw a distinction between the good guys and the bad guys in this, because they share similar beliefs. Both sets are survivalists, both sets are preppers, both sets believe that the end of the world is coming in one form or another. And, you know, all of them pretty much are gun-toting supporters of America's Second Amendment. It's just that one lot of them are on drugs and trying to kill you. That's really the only distinction that you can draw. So it is a kind of Americana theme park in that way, and maybe that is the message, maybe that is the political message, that there's not that much difference really after all, but they seem to have wanted it to be a kind of victory of America's centre-right over its far-right, because America doesn't really have a left to speak of. And it wasn't, and that seems to be what's upset them. I mean, I am left-wing, I am small L liberal in the proper sense of the word and so on, and yet I saw plenty that's praiseworthy in this game, even politically, just making that that point, that lack of distinction, seems to me to be making some sort of political point, but not one that intrudes on the gameplay or beats you over the head with its righteousness, you know? Community was what came through for me. You know, people banding together, putting aside their differences to overcome a common foe, and that's a good thing and something that should come through to everyone. And I'm surprised that they didn't pick up on the same things that I did, that this culturally appropriated, not enough scare quotes in the world, America in the same way that these other cultures have been appropriated in previous games. That, to me, would seem to be something praiseworthy. You know, how do you like it? Sort of thing. I'm surprised no one picked up on that. I mean, the partisanship and drama stirring attract clicks, and that's really all there is to it at the end of the day. They read politics into games where it isn't there, and they want politics in games where it isn't there necessarily. It's not a consistent or meaningful position to have, and at the end of the day, it's a good, slightly above average game, and frankly isn't worth all that controversy. I really don't understand why they felt the need. All they're going to have done is driven sales amongst people who they regard as ideological enemies, and that's fucking stupid. Zang.
Pretty fucked up. Pretty fucked up now. Thought she used to be pretty, but now she's just pretty fucked